Hello y'all, welcome back. It is time for week number, this is race 4 now of the F1 season, 20 still to go. And we head to a track that has been the season opener for the past couple of years in Bahrain. But before we get through talking about Bahrain and taking you around the proper guided tour, let's talk a little bit about what we saw in Japan and what we learned. And Japan was to put it mildly, fairly uneventful race. Definitely more interesting on the timings tower and screens than the actual race itself. The expected two-stop did not pan out, and for a number of other reasons, the race never really kicked off, one of which being Japan, it almost always has shambles on lap 1, turn 1, and this year everybody was kind of through cleanly, and once you were there, the other factors kind of set in. Number one, it was estimated that you needed about a 0.8 advantage, so 0.8 of a second advantage on a lap in order to make an overtake happen around Japan. Obviously, only having one DRS zone, the length of that DRS zone is pretty short down into turn 1, and it's not much of a braking opportunity into turn 1 either. So you really needed quite a significant advantage in the first place to even get an overtake done. And a few reasons why that it's so hard to get that advantage, that 0.8 needed. Number one, at this point in the regulation set, a very mature or a few years in regulation set, the field is about as close as it's been in a while. You can see the differences that make up a Q1 exit versus a top 10 start are very tiny. So the cars are already pretty close in performance, even though the consensus is that McLaren is kind of the dominant car. You can see even there they didn't have the dominant race pace in order to overtake Verstappen on track. Reason number two, and it kind of goes into with the maturing regulations, designers of the cars have figured out more and more how to throw dirty air off of the car. The early 2022 regulation sets the aerodynamics were designed in a way to minimize dirty air. And of course, as designers work within those bounds and look at where the rules allow them, they're able to extract more downforce, move more air in order to get more efficient. But that also just typically comes with the natural result of dirty air. And you can see it, especially later in the stages. Once a car got to about 1.5 seconds, it got really hard to close up into that 1 second range, much less, make use of the DRS. So very tough, another tough reason for the overtake. Another thing that's, these all kind of go together, and this was something I thought was very interesting at the very early stages of the race when Lando's engineer told them that they actually expected it to be the rear tires limiting the traction. So you tend to get a bias around tracks, what they will call front limited or rear limited. Typically, front limited tracks have a lot of sweeping corners. They're fast. So China and Japan, very much examples of front limited tracks. Australia is a slightly rear limited, if not more neutral. Bahrain, which we're at this week, is definitely more of a rear limited track. And that is typically a resultant of a lot of on-throttle situations coming out of slow and mid-speed corners. Really puts the strain on the tire in the acceleration. Now, the reason that was interesting to hear Lando's engineer say that is that because Japan is typically a front-limited track, and what caused most of the degradation around Japan typically is that first sector and really putting a lot of energy through the front tires, through those S's. So we know that the first sector was resurfaced in Japan, and much like we saw the resurfacing in China, it seemed to give drivers a ton of extra grip, and while also reducing the tire wear as a result. Because there's not as much slip through the tires, with extra grip, the less slip there is, the less they generate heat, the slower they degrade. And that kind of played into why, Japan didn't quite have the front wear that we expect to see from them that usually ends up being a factor through the corners, like the spoon curve and 130R. Lastly, I think this is also a result of the changes that Pirelli has made to the tire in the off-season. Japan, the first race of the season on the hardest compounded tires, C1, 2, and 3s. And it was clear that they were very resilient tires and not a lot of pace differential even between the tires. So definitely something to look forward to. Bahrain, another track that's using that same set, C1, 2, and 3, some very hard tires. However, Bahrain is much more rear limited. Pirelli has stated that they are looking to bring softer sets of compounds than they have in years prior at some of the next upcoming races. I believe Imola is actually going to see the C6 tire, the new, essentially like ultra soft. I think at the start of the year, the only place that tire was going to be used was Monaco, but that, I believe, is coming in Imola now. I believe Miami has also been given the go-ahead to move their tire compounds one step softer. So we'll see if that comes to fruition later in the year, and if Pirelli sticks with that change. So let's go ahead and talk about the teams themselves, kind of the quick storyline rundowns for each team at the Japanese Grand Prix. Starting with the race win, Red Bull, of course, a lot of intrigue with Yuki Tsunoda coming into the team, who had an okay weekend. We'll talk a little more about that later. But Verstappen, a tremendous lap to put it on pole position, and then drove pretty flawlessly out in front. We saw a lot of drivers make mistakes into the final chicane, run deep, lose some time. So for Verstappen to not put a foot wrong the entire time when Lando was pretty much a second behind him the whole race is a testament to just what kind of makes him a world champion, and that consistency and lack of folding to pressure. Realistically, the only place that Lando got close, as I looked up on my screen, just drove off the track, the only place Lando really got close was that pit exit situation, which Max was clearly ahead, and they hit the pit limiter line. I don't know, Lando was going for what he could do. Tried to get to essentially what would have been the inside of turn one, and tried to make a move happen. But it was never really going to come off as soon as Verstappen doesn't have to give him that space on a pit exit like that. He's there. He just has to stay within the pit exit line. So fair play. That's what I expected. No result or no action necessary. For Tsunoda, had a pretty decent weekend in the practice sessions. Showed that even on similar engine modes, similar fuel, he was able to get within a tenth or two of Max in practice. Really small mistake in Q2 kept him from advancing over into Q3. Had to start 15th because of it, and then drove a decent race on pace, but again, because of the overtaking issues, didn't really get much more. So we'll see what Yuki can do around around the next couple of tracks, if that pace is quite real. McLaren next up. Both drivers didn't have the best of laps in Q3 for their going for pole position. I believe Piastri lost 0.3 in the first sector on his final run, so it wasn't a very good run from him. I think that McLaren still is the class of the field easily, and probably could have taken pole position by about 0.2 if they had put their lap together. And then they just kind of got stuck in the train. Oscar Piastri, I think, looked a little quicker overall on the weekend. I was very curious for McLaren not to, in the waning stages of the race, at least let Oscar have a go and try and catch up Verstappen. He closed up to Norris pretty well. Even if he didn't get the job done, could have pretty easily swap those positions around later in the at the very end of the race to give that position back to Lando if that's what it was all about. But it does kind of look like at the early stages, based on what we heard in Australia of when he was saying hold position and when he could attack, and now what we've seen in Japan, kind of looks like McLaren has already decided that their championship challenger is going to be Lando Norris. Usually teams with the best car will wait a couple of, a good chunk of the season until a driver establishes themselves as the clear one to throw any kind of team orders behind. But McLaren looks to be starting with that right out of the gate. And they rounded out the podium. So next up is Ferrari. Leclerc did very well to put that car P4 in qualifying, and as a result of the difficulty in overtaking, was able to keep George Russell at bay over the entire course of the race, and drove a pretty good race, especially around the pit stop window, in order to make sure he did not get jumped in that phase. Lewis, still a bit scrappy, finding the limits of the car for sure, not quite performing up to Charles's level this week. I believe he was blocked on one of his Q3 runs as well by Carlos Sainz, or was that Q2? I think it was Q2. But, still seems to be struggling to find the absolute limit of the car for sure. I did a little bit of research of my own, comparing Lewis's lap times across the whole race to Charles, and one of the things I'm noticing as a trend I kind of suspected, and now I've at least a little bit of data to back up. Lewis seems to be struggling with the consistent limit of the car. He's usually able to put in laps in clean air that are as fast, if not faster, than Charles, but it seems like he, every 5 or 6 laps or so, has some kind of mistake where he has to gather the car up. Usually it's, just exit oversteer or over rotation under braking. So it seems like he's struggling to find the limit of that car in order to really keep the consistent lap times going. Because he'll just have those aberrant laps where he's, 0.6, half a second off of his previous couple of laps and is right back down to the pace. So seems to be struggling to see where the edge of that car is. Next up, Mercedes. Another good weekend for the Mercedes team. George Russell not quite mixing it up with the front row like he had been for the past couple of races, but still a decent qualifying result for him. Wasn't able to get past the Ferrari of Leclerc, but a solid top 5 finish for George Russell. Kimi Antonelli, for me, was kind of the highlight of Mercedes. That very long medium stint at the start of the race, to start the race, and then managed to hold off the offset tire attack from Lewis when he came into the pits. But otherwise, fastest man on track a lot of the time. I believe he officially becomes the youngest driver to have led a race, and also the youngest driver to finish with the fastest lap in a race. So Kimi Antonelli showing that he can be the real deal, and could be a thorn in the side of George Russell in the relative short term. I know Toto Wolff over the past couple of seasons has been very excited to get Antonelli into that car, and it does appear to be paying dividends. But my impression kind of remains the same of the Mercedes car itself. It looks to be solidly quick, but also quite friendly to drive overall, compared to a lot of the other teams that are having balance issues. That Mercedes looks like it drives nicely, it gets into setup windows pretty easily, and does not try and doesn't make the drivers work too hard to get lap time out of it. Next up down the grid in the finishing position was Isaac Hadjar from the VCARB team. So a good result for Hadjar. Continues to show that that lap 0 crash in Australia, the formation lap crash, was probably an aberration. He is a quick driver, qualified in the top 10, and managed to only lose a spot in the race to Lewis Hamilton. So we expected the Ferrari would probably get through, but otherwise he held position, did not lose any further ground. Finished, nice and into the points, and even at the tail stages, might have been a factor of Lewis going on to the mediums that were degrading a little more, but he was catching up Lewis in a Ferrari at the end of that race, and even got to, I think, about 1.5 seconds at the end. Now, we all know how difficult it was to overtake, but shows that in clear air, he is looking quite good. Liam Lawson, his first weekend back in the VCARB team, the RB team, qualified one position ahead of Tsunoda. So again, kind of lending more credence to the fact that that Red Bull car is very difficult to drive. But kind of a disappointing race overall the rest of the way. Finished a quiet 17th. Tsunoda was able to get by Lawson. So we'll see if Liam Lawson is able to kind of get the confidence back now that he's back in the junior team to, fight with Hadjar, who has a handful fewer races of experience. Of course, Lawson came into this season with 11 Grand Prix of experience. Hadjar, of course, none. So we'll see if Lawson has the pace to get back there. Next up, Williams. Alex Albon, again, continuing to show he's the leader of that team. Another points-paying position for him, while Carlos Sainz was out of the points. Carlos Sainz did get knocked back a little bit with an impeding penalty in qualifying. I think it was a 3-place grid penalty, so that put him a bit on the back foot in a race where overtaking was going to be very difficult, but still just does seem that Alex Albon at the moment has the measure of Carlos Sainz in those cars. So we'll see if he can make the improvements. Sainz has been getting a little closer to Albon each race, but we'll see if he can continue to make those improvements, because at this point his stock on the grid is kind of falling a bit after being compared rather favorably to some of Leclerc's weekends. Him not being able to get on par with Alex Albon, probably hurting his stock, and also probably helping Alex Albon's stock a little bit as the driver's seats develop. Next up, Haas. Ollie Behrman scored the last point, P10 finish for him, and it was his first race finishing ahead of his teammate Esteban Ocon. So we know Ollie Behrman is a quick driver. He had his fill-in stint with Ferrari for Jeddah last year and showed pretty good pace, similar to the tail end of his reserve roles last year. So him, fighting with Ocon is an okay measuring stick. So potential real deal opportunity for Ollie Behrman. Ocon, on the other hand, very forgettable race, P18 finish for him while his teammate was in the points. Aston Martin next up. Alonso gets his first Grand Prix finish of the season. So after a couple of DNFs that would not have helped him out, he's able to get to the end of one and finish ahead of his teammate. They're both outside the points, and Lance Stroll, after the decently hot start that he's had, was the only car to finish a lap down to the leaders this last time out. As we get to kind of the back bits of the grid, we've got Alpine next up. I actually, in my notes, I wrote Renault, which they haven't been called Renault for a few years now, so that's kind of funny. But, considering how quiet the race was, aside from Verstappen's pole and win, I think Jack Doohan's crash in FP2, probably one of the bigger stories of the weekend. Looked to be kind of a silly rookie mistake, leaving the DRS open when he turned into turn one. Obviously, DRS usually closes when you hit the brakes, and it's not much of a braking zone into turn one, if at all, especially on a push lap. So it was pretty obvious based on his steering wheel and some of the off-corners we've seen that DRS was open when he went into turn one, and of course no rear downforce, and that back end just absolutely went. Huge kind of airplane crash for him. He looked to be pretty banged up getting out of the car, was favoring his left side, it looked like. And after the race, the actual Grand Prix that he did still take part in, He needed to be helped out of the car, wasn't able to kind of use his arm to lift himself out via the halo, had some help from his crew to get out of that car. So we'll see if he's able to recover from that injury. It's not ideal timing for the mistakes and also for him just performance-wise, because he does have Franco Colapinto rumored to be kind of looking over his shoulder to take that seat away from him in the relative short term, even if some of the rumors are to be believed in. I'm inclined to sort of believe them because, well, Alpine does all kinds of silly stuff. Last up, we got Gasly, had a really quiet P13 race. Wasn't very eventful for him. The Alpine just doesn't look to be quite, in the points-paying fight on raw pace just yet, especially with the speed of kind of the top 4 teams taking up 8 of those 10 spots. So Alpine definitely has some work to do to try and catch up. Lastly, you've got Sauber, who once again, quiet day. Hulkenberg ahead of Bortoleto, but towards the back of the grid. That's Sauber, not a lot to fight for, and I'll probably say this many times throughout the year. With the ownership change incoming, the Audi project to take over next year, I wouldn't expect they're going to spend a lot of time or resources developing more the 2025 car. And I'll say the same with Aston Martin. If they can't get onto terms relatively soon, they do have the Honda power unit coming in next year. They'll probably just look to the new regulations with Adrian Newey. So a couple of teams looking to try and find a little bit more an eye to the future rather than the current championship battle. Ferrari, I believe, has an upgrade package coming this week in Bahrain, so we'll see what they can do out of it. And hopefully that can get that car behaving in a more predictable window, cure some of the ride height issues, and gives it a car that Leclerc and Hamilton can start fighting for the wins for. The Red Bull seems to be just about there. I think Max is only 1 point off of Lando at this stage. So, championship battle, even though that Red Bull does not look very good, it's still very much on. The fight is very much on for them. So now we'll talk about the Bahrain circuit, of course, in the desert. So we will see quite a bit of track evolution as the weekend goes on, as the dust and sand gets cleared. Overnight, or over the course of the day, the sand typically will blow onto the track. So the first couple of laps will usually clear up the racing line when the race starts. But look for that offline to make it a little bit more difficult to overtake over the course of the race, especially as the rubber and the discarded marbles, that's what I'm looking for, gets put onto the track. As I said earlier, Bahrain, a high deg circuit. They are bringing the C1, C2, C3 tires, so this is the hardest set. However, Bahrain being more rear limited, has typically been a pretty high deg circuit. Of course, the track has not been resurfaced. It's still pretty rough. Eats the tires a bit, and it is a rear limited circuit where the rear tires are what is going to go off first rather than the front. So here we are pulling into the P1 grid box. A decent run down to turn 1 to a sharp hairpin. So definitely some opportunity for some first lap sends. We'll see what teams decide to do strategically and just mentality wise, because usually it's been the first race of the season for the past couple of years where they definitely kind of try and make everything happen. Now it's 3 races in, maybe a different tack, but through turn 1, turn 2, and turn 3, this little sequence, you get your second blast of DRS down this relatively medium-sized straight, but you have this very interesting kind of off-camber opening corner. You want to get to the apex early and then swing well out wide to get here. It is a decent overtaking opportunity because of that back-to-back DRS. Then you have this left, right, left kind of combination of sweepers, really utilizing the downforce of the car, and then directly into a heavy braking zone at this kind of bottom of a hill hairpin. It has been an opportunity for overtakes if you can get a good run through that little S section. Next, you're back up a hill, and then one of the trickier corners on the calendar, this double left-hander, turn 9, turn 10 combination. When I'm doing the full speed runs, you'll see it's very difficult to get the car slowed down for that second bit because the track tips away from you. It's very easy to lock that front left tire. Then you get another little blast of DRS. And if you can catch a mistake, which is so frequent in turn 10, there's usually an opportunity to go for a move into turn 11, get the car in, and then on the power as much as you can. As you head up this hill, it's pretty much foot flat to the floor through these combination of sweepers. Tricky to mark your braking point here for this kind of cresting right-hander. And then you get a nice long non-DRS straight, but pretty solid slipstreaming opportunity to close up to the car ahead. And then you're into the braking for the last technically 2 corners because of this little kink, but it is really just one kind of full complex. As you get to the end of the lap, you're down the pit straight, DRS is wide open, and this is where you really get your best overtaking opportunities. Track is fairly bumpy, you'll see lots of sparks. But let's go for a little bit of a quicker lap here. So into turn 1, try and get the car rotate. Use the middle of the track. Very difficult to get on the power as the car's kind of unloaded now. Up to the next DRS zone, we're headed to turn 4. Find your braking point. For me right now, it's about 100 meters. Get turned in and try and just dance the rear of the car all the way out to the exit. The more power you can apply, the better. Quick blip down and then back on the throttle through that right-hander. You see a bit of a lockup into the hairpin. Try and use this wide exit as much as you can. The track wider on exit than on entry. Now the tricky combination. You can see locked up that front left and deep into turn 10. So those are the kind of errors that you will see. And I wasn't trying to do it. It's just difficult to do. Then you're up through these very fast sweepers. Get the car turned. And again, kind of cresting that hill, trying to get on the throttle as early as you can and head down to the last couple of corners. There are a couple of high curbs where you won't typically see too much curb being taken on that final corner. But here we are, getting out of the corner. So let's talk strategy as we finish up that flying lap, going to the 29s. Pretty good lap. Decent lap there. So typically Bahrain has been a 2-stop strategy race. For the last couple of years, we've very much seen a lot of soft, hard, or soft, a set of softs and hards. The medium tire has not really factored into the race over the last couple of seasons. So we'll have to see what the medium tire looks like when teams are running it in the practice sessions. And this is also the other reason why I say the fact that it's not the season opener could potentially make a difference. We've typically, last couple of years, seen a lot of cars starting on the soft tire at the first race of the season, try and get as good of a launch as they can. Right away, get as good as position as you can. Will that change this year? Will they have a different approach? We'll have to wait and see, but considering it's 2 softs and a hard that we've typically seen, or a soft and 2 sets of hards, I'm very curious to see if the medium tire strategy will come into play. And of course, with the number of slower corners that you're exiting, you're putting a lot of pain through those rear tires, and as those rear tires wear, it's the exits of the corners where you will feel that extra pain. So look for drivers that have the more worn tires than their opponents to struggle on the exits of these slower corners, like turn 1. Obviously, a lot being asked of the rear of the car in this combination of corners to try and keep the car gripped up. I think it'll be an interesting race. It's a track that Ferrari has typically gone pretty well around. Leclerc especially has driven very well around this Bahrain circuit. So we'll have to see if Ferrari, I know they're bringing some upgrades, if they have anything fun and exciting to show for us this week. But it is a track much more conducive to overtaking. unless the tires are super, super resilient, we're not getting that, you know, pace differential between them, we shouldn't see the same kind of snore fest that Japan ended up being. Should be a lot more opportunity, and of course, we have seen, especially in the seasons where teams were running 2 softs and a hard, we've seen, depending on whether they run those softs in their middle first and second stint or first and third stint, then you get some interesting fights going on. Nighttime race, so track temperature is a little bit cooler. It's obviously still out in the desert in April, but especially we've seen drivers coming out of the pits on a set of hard tires definitely struggle to get those tires up to temperature for the first few corners. So I would expect the undercut to play the best around here. But as always, it's going to be a wait and see because the tires, we've definitely gotten some surprises out of the tires already this year. So but looking forward to Bahrain. I believe it's what, second race in a triple header, because we had Japan, I believe we have Jeddah the following week before we get our next little break. So another race that's going to be an interesting one. We'll see if Aston Martin can kind of bounce back. They're a team I'm kind of looking forward to. If they don't make a step into like pretty solid point scoring position in the next race or two, I could expect to see them to just go, it's going to be 2026, ignore anything else for the 2025 season. And we'll see if Red Bull is indeed making ground, if that car is better than we think, or if McLaren, I would expect McLaren to kind of show their overall pace again. But thank you all for joining me. Hope we have an interesting and fun race here in Bahrain. I'll catch you guys next week. Peace.